Years ago, I heard about a ministry for college students. An outside speaker would be brought in every last Thursday of the month. As a matter of fact, the ministry was referred to as Last Thursday. And the assignment that was given to the speaker was for him or her to share with these students a message that they would give if this was their last Thursday on earth. The assignment was, if you had one chance to say what you thought was most important, what these students needed to hear more than anything else, what would that message be? I think that's a good assignment for all of us, don't you? To think, to search our hearts. What do we value? What do we believe? What have we trusted? What have we found through our experience that brings life and joy and fulfillment and strength? What would that message be that we would share with the world? I think that's where Joshua found himself in the 24th chapter of the book bearing his name. He knew that he would not have many times left to speak to the people of Israel, and he must have thought, what can I say that will help my people move forward to live a life that is faithful and full? I'm sure he thought back on his life, the time where he and the Israelites were enslaved in bondage in Egypt, how God had delivered them from Pharaoh, how God had walked with them for 40 years through the wilderness, and then finally had brought them into the promised land. He searched his heart, and he told the people of Israel this: the promises of the Lord have never failed. Not one of them has failed. All that God has promised, he has done. Hi, my name is Robert Renfro, and I'm so glad you're starting this study. The heart of it are these very words that Joshua spoke. The promises of the Lord are unfailing. If we build our lives on these promises, I believe not only will we discover that God's promises are unfailing, but we will discover a power that keeps us from falling or failing. Jesus told us something in John chapter 16, verse 33. I guess you can call it a promise. It's not the kind of promise that we take our yellow highlighters out and underline in our Bibles, but it's something we need to take seriously. Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. Life is difficult for all of us. None of us gets a pass. All of us face incredible problems, suffer deep hurts. And the question really is, where are we going to go to find the strength we need so that we do not fail or fall? Where do we go to find the hope, the wisdom, the power that we need to overcome whatever comes against us? Years ago, I heard a saying that I think has such wisdom and really such power. It's this: it's not what happens to you, but what happens in you that makes the difference. That's good news. I think that's empowering because all of us are going to have things happen to us. There's so much in life that we can't control, things that aren't positive. None of us can control the economy. None of us can control drunk drivers. None of us, we discover, can control our children as they get older and begin to make decisions, many of which are unhealthy and even hurtful to them and to us. None of us can control what others say about us or do to us. We can exercise, we can eat right, but we discover that none of us can control whether or not we get cancer or suffer some other kind of illness. None of us can control when the ones that we love suffer. As a matter of fact, we find at times, no matter how hard we try, we simply cannot make their lives better. So Jesus is right. In this world, we're going to have trouble. And the question is, where do we go for strength? Where do we go for hope and wisdom? That's where I think it's important to remember. It's not what happens to us, it's what happens in us that makes the difference. And I believe if we remember the words of Jesus, that the place we go to find that strength and that power, we go to God's Word. Jesus told us in Matthew 27, as he was winding up his teaching on the Sermon of the Mount. Remember, he said, the one who builds his life upon my words, he's like a man who builds a house upon a rock. And when the storms come, and when the rains rage, and when the winds blow, that house remains. It does not fail. It does not fall. God has given us his word. He has given us his promises. And if we will trust in them, if we will let those promises be what happens in us, what we're going to discover is that we have the strength and the power to overcome life's troubles, to live lives that are full and good, faithful to God, and a blessing to others. Being a pastor is a little bit like being a scientist with humanity being your laboratory. You have a great opportunity to study people. You get to listen to their hearts in their best moments and also in their worst moments. And if you listen, if you're careful, you can learn a lot about people. And one of the lessons that you learn pretty early is that it's not the people with the most problems who crater and fall. And it's not the people who have the easiest lives that thrive. There's not really any correlation. People with huge burdens live lives that are fulfilling and lives that are thriving. And people with few problems sometimes find so many different reasons to be upset, to be worried, to be anxious, make excuses not to move forward or to be faithful. Why is that? It's what's going on within us. Where do we look for strength, hope, and help? Some people really, they might not know it, they might tell you they don't, but they look to their circumstances. If things are going well, they're doing great. If things are not going well, they struggle inside. They're controlled by what's going on around them. You might ask them, so how are you doing? And they're likely to say to you, well, okay, under the circumstances. I don't want to be flip because I know how hard life can be. But let me ask you this question. What are you doing living under your circumstances? Jesus did not die on the cross. Jesus was not raised from the dead. He was not raised with great power so that you and I could live under our circumstances. Jesus died for our sins. He was raised with power so that you and I could overcome the things that come against us. But many people, they look to their circumstances to determine how they're going to live, how they're going to respond. Other people, they're really controlled not so much by their circumstances, but by their emotions. They're controlled by their feelings. They are up and down. They never know what they're going to be doing or how they're going to be living because their emotions take over. Really, isn't that one of the things that we try to teach our children? Not to be ruled by their emotions, not to be controlled by their feelings, but to find a way to live above those things. I read about an old priest who was retiring after 50 years of ministry, and a younger priest at his retirement party said, Father, for 50 years you've listened to the hearts, to the minds of people. What is it that you've discovered? And he said two things. One, people are not as happy as they appear to be. And two, there are no grown-ups. And I think what he meant by that is that when things are going well, people are happy, but once things go bad or someone says something to them that bothers them, they think they're treated unfairly, the tendency is for us to become children again, to become upset, to react rather than to respond, to complain and to become negative, to whine about what's going on around us. Some people are controlled by their circumstances. Other people are controlled by their emotions. Some people, for a sense of strength, they look to their own wisdom. They look to their own abilities. The problem with that, of course, is that life is bigger than we are. Life really does have a way of humbling us. You know the word, don't you, that describes someone who believes that his or her wisdom is sufficient, needs no help from anyone else, and no source of strength from outside him or herself? That word is pride. And we have it on very good authority that pride goeth before a fall. Life has a way of humbling every one of us, and if we will learn the lessons of life, what we learn is that we need a strength greater than our own. So where do we go? I believe we go to the words of Joshua. He looked at his life and he discovered what was stable, what gave strength, what gave hope, what gave power were the promises of God. Why? Because they are unfailing. They do not change, they do not waver, and they are always sufficient for us. I want you to live a life of promise. In every sense of the word, I want you to live a life that is full, that is better than you can imagine, better than you could ever create for yourself. And the way we do that is by walking in the promises of God. God knows you. God understands you. God knows what you need, and he has provided that for you. And what he has provided are the promises that will give you strength and that will help you overcome everything in life that would come against you. Emile Caillet was born in the latter part of the 19th century in France. He loved learning. He was an intellectual, even as a young man. And he studied philosophy, in particular naturalism. That's the philosophy that there's really nothing more that exists than what you find in nature, that the world is controlled by physical laws. There's nothing more than that. He was an atheist, as a matter of fact. He grew up under his family's influence, being rather angry about religion. But as a young man, he went to fight in World War I. He fought in the trenches of Europe, and he saw the horrors of war. He had friends that he loved dearly die in his arms. And in the late night watches of that war, he had a great deal of time to think. What is life? What does it mean? Why is it worth living? Where do I find something that provides meaning in my life? He himself was wounded. He was cared for by a group of Americans, and after several months, he returned back to France and to the little village where he lived. And he began to write what he described as a book that would understand me. Whenever he read and he came upon a sentence or a passage that he thought was particularly insightful and helpful about the human condition, about who he was, he would write that down. And after several years, he finally thought that he had finished this book that would understand me. He took down all of the passages that he had written, put them in a beautiful bound volume, and on a wonderful sunny French day, in the afternoon, he went and sat down beneath a tree and began to read. But instead of being filled with a sense of joy and exhilaration, that finally had found a book that understood him and made sense of his life, he felt just the opposite: despair and lostness. Because as he read, he understood that he was reading the words of men and women who understood themselves no better than he understood himself. And rather than finding the wisdom that he was looking for, he was left with emptiness. He went back home. He spoke with his wife. He asked her what she had done that day, and she hesitantly told him a story. That very same day, she had been out walking in their village, and she came upon a little road that she'd never seen before. She walked down to the end of it, and there was a church, a little village church. For some reason, she went inside, and the priest there met her. They began to talk for a few minutes, and finally, before she left, he gave her a Bible. At this point, she was very reluctant to tell her husband that she had accepted this Bible because she knew how he felt about religion. But to her surprise, Emile Caillet looked at her and said, "Give me that book." And he tore it from her hands. And he rushed to his room, and he sat down and he began to read. He writes, "I happened upon the Beatitudes. And as I read the words of Jesus, my heart began to burn inside me. I spent all night reading primarily in the Gospels, and as the morning light appeared, the one who lived in the pages of the Bible became alive in me. I had discovered the book that understood me." Friends, God understands you. He created you. He knows what you need even better than you do. He knows you're going to suffer. He knows you're going to struggle. He knows you're going to face hard times, but you are not alone. He has given us what we need. He has given us his son Jesus. He has given us his presence, and he has given us his promises. In this study, we're going to look at 7 great promises, life-changing, life-giving promises. Promises that will give you strength and will make certain that you never fall and you never fail. I hope and pray that this study is a great blessing to you. As we close, let me give you a couple questions. If you're reading through this book by yourself, maybe it'll help you think a bit. If you're in a group, hopefully it will help you have a good discussion. One question is this: look back on your life. Can you see some change in what you look to for a sense of strength and hope and wisdom in your life? When you were young, where did you look? And where do you look today? What has life taught you? What has God taught you that has caused you to begin to look to a different place, to live a life that's unfailing? And here's another one I'd like you to think about. Can you remember some time in your life that was particularly difficult, when you really had nothing to hold on to but the promises of God? What was that time like, and what did that promise or those promises mean to you? How did it help you? And what did you learn about God and about yourself by holding on to that promise?